Build creative confidence. Beat the inspiration addiction. Join the Writer's Gym. Rosie Garland writes poetry, long and short fiction, and sings with post-punk band The March Violets. Her latest novel, The Fates, is a retelling of the Greek myth of the Fates, and her first collection of short fiction, Your Sons and Daughters Are Beyond, is out now. In 2023, she was made Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, and Val McDermid has named her one of the most compelling LGBT plus writers in the UK today. Her new collection, This Is How I Fight, is out in June 2025. Do you know, instead of starting with a biog, I really want to start with eyebrows and things around that. I remember when I met you on Mslexia in, good God, nearly 10 years ago, 2018.
I think it was 2018 or was it 2019? One of the two.
Oh, I think it was 18 because I think wasn't 19 the year that they saw something coming and, you know, panicked sensibly. But the thing that I remember is the phrase goth best in show. I think that was, or how did you phrase it? Is that?
Yeah, I've got this lovely little kind of rosette made out of lovely velvet ribbon that a friend made me. And somebody once said to me, "What's that?" And I said, "I got it for being best goth in show." And it's like it stuck.
Yeah. And this was extremely helpful for me to see, because I don't know if it's been similar journeys or same journey for you, but the more illustrated I feel, the more in the room I feel. And with Writing Life, but also with you as Rosie Lugosi, it's a bit like form and content in writing, that the closer they are together, the more they reflect each other, the more authentic everything is.
I'm going to have to write that down. The more illustrated I feel, you know, I love that. The idea.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, when I performed as Rosie Lugosi back in the day, I was kind of full false eyelashes. I stood 6 foot tall because of the height of my platform boots. I wore wigs. I had fangs. I wore corsetry and all kinds of kinky nonsense. And I was highly illustrated. And it's not that I feel I'm doing big performance. I'm not doing kind of big drag queen anymore. And I was a drag queen. I was performing a version of woman. But I am illustrated when I do readings or interface in workshops. I think that's fascinating.
I'd love to ask you about it, just because I do remember just starting on what I first saw you doing was poetry. But actually, when I first literally saw you, you were emceeing at Mslexia, and with absolute stillness, just letting the room come to you and fully goth. And I just thought, yes, that's how we do it.
Some of that is being a teacher in a rough high school, because seriously, it's like if one is not afraid of 16-year-olds who are twice one's height, then you're going to do fine. And being able to project one's voice to the back of a room of 16-year-old people who are twice your size, who are not the least bit interested in the causes of the First World War.
And because for me it was drama. I was in those schools as drama, so it was almost more expected. But for you, it was history.
Well, no, I was largely an English teacher, but I was mostly focusing on kids whose first language wasn't English. And so what I would do is I would team teach with history teachers, science teachers, maths teachers, English teachers. And so I got to teach everything. It was great.
And that performance element, and what for me with makeup, I have issues with the word costume, but with what for me is illustration, going into schools and you're there for them. You are there to cause a reaction in them. Our purpose as performers is the audience, but the more real it is, you know, the more
and authentic and the more felt it is. And to be honest, for those who are listening in black and white, what you're doing with your arms at the moment also is a big part of it. You're making gestures and expression, and that takes me back to when I was 5 and at primary school, and it is one of my absolute core memories that fed my attitude towards performance. I can't really call it a school play. There were 20 sort of like grubby infants. But I was the queen, guess. I was the elf queen, and I had to summon my minion elves who were like over there, again, off stage is very grand, who were over there. And I had to summon them to kind of all come scampering up and surround me. And so I went like that. And again, for those listening in black and white, I crooked my finger and the teacher said, no, no, no. Big arm gestures, dear, big arm gestures. And I learned everything I needed to know from that primary school teacher who taught me the power of a big arm gesture rather than a teeny weeny little gesture with your finger.
I have to say snap at this point, because my first experience of being on stage was in the first year of primary school as the Wicked Fairy, which is possibly not shocking given what happened next. But I do remember I remember pulling the faces. It was faces rather than arm. And I remember waving the wand. And I remember everybody singing the Wicked Fairy, cast a spell, because that was the level of the lyrics. And I don't remember what the play was, what we did or anything, but I do remember people smiling as I waved my wand and pulled nasty faces. And something that actually I've enjoyed in your poetry and fiction actually is that it's, for me, what is interesting is becoming ourselves, is identity, is getting rid of the things where people say you're not supposed to do that or be that, because I do remember being a bit older than when I was the Wicked Fairy, and I had certain family members, not my mother happily, but certain family members who didn't think that pulling faces and illustrating was a good thing. Flash forward to this week, and my new guitar teacher, with whom I have come further in about 4 or 5 lessons than I ever did in my life ever, lets me pull faces, swear a lot, get things wrong, laugh about it and enjoy it. And this feels relevant to everything, which is why I want to wear makeup even when we're not on video, because it all feels like it is all part of the same thing at some level.
Yeah. Yes, I do. It's like I make a joke and say it's like, when I've got my eyebrows on, I'm ready to face the world. And maybe it is that thing about going head first into the world, and your eyebrows are the first thing that interface with the world. Yeah, and it does take me to, I know we're talking about extreme examples, but when I stand up to read in front of gorgeous people who've actually spent with their time and effort to come to hear me read, apart from the least I can do is wear a nice clean shirt, my mother would be proud. It's about embodiment. I feel that I am embodying the words that I'm speaking so that the dividing line doesn't feel dramatic. It's like I don't hide behind a sheet of paper or hide behind the book or mumble or look down. Sure, we're going ahead, but one of my motivators and engines for writing is to connect, and speaking the words and connecting with an audience. It's just, there's nothing like it.
There is absolutely nothing like it, and everything is connection.
And I know everybody's different. I know everyone's different because obviously I can only speak for myself, but yeah, to echo you, everything is connection.
And the embodiment, I like the word to embody it, certainly with teaching. I'm laughing because you mentioned eyebrows, and my English teacher she had the glasses and she was very skeletal, and she'd raise one eyebrow above glasses, and it would just be more terrifying than anything short of Donald Trump that was ever going to happen at all after that. And, it is, there is a power. You are, as a teacher, you are embodying the subject. And I could talk about this forever, but I want to talk more about you specifically. So I'm going to come back and say, well, I discovered you, A through Mslexia, but as a poet, first of all. And I'd love to ask a little bit about whether you've always felt like you are all of the things at once. Is a sort of, if there was a sort of poetry and songs before novels, or was it just a case of which opportunities came along at which order?
I didn't start embarking on a novel till quite late on, I suppose. Certainly poetry and songs and short fiction were there much earlier. I was writing all of that when I was a kid. I was creating little storybooks for my dolls. But in terms of like a novel, it was only when I got an idea that I realised was too big. I wasn't planning on being a novelist. It was, not something that anyone I knew did. And from a working class background, it's like, well, you read novels, you don't write them. I was weird enough for writing poetry. But then I got an idea that was too big. And so I started. And I guess in terms of the forms, I am a big one for quotes, and I may indulge in a number of them while we're talking. And one I absolutely love is Walt Whitman, who said, "I contain multitudes." He also said in the next line, "Do I contradict myself? Yes, I do." Which I think is just wonderfully self-forgiving. So thank you, Walt Whitman. And it is like, whether it's poetry, short fiction, song lyrics, novels, it is like having multiple tabs open in the browser of the imagination. It's all words.
They add to each other, don't they, as well? That when you find your voice in one area and you go, "Oh, look, here is another toy, here is another channel of expression," it does make you realise it's all words. We can access all of it.
We can if we want to. I mean, some people just want to access poetry. Brilliant. I'm greedy.
That's quite a lovely way of putting it. I think for a lot of the people I work with, this is the Writer's Gym podcast, and the purpose of the Writer's Gym is finding the habits that mean you bring it into your life regularly. It stops being something on a pedestal or that only happens in completely empty days and then doesn't anyway because you're putting too much pressure on it. It's something that we bring exercises into every day and every week. And there are the actual writing exercises, there are the community events, there are the things that mean it keeps going every week. But I think for a lot of the people that I speak to a lot in those situations, that's a really reassuring thing to hear, because we can do what I've always talked about as the should fairies, that I'm only this kind of writer, and they all sort of swarm at you going, "You're not that kind of person," or "You're not that kind of writer," or "You should be doing this instead." And actually cutting through all of that, we know is a good thing anyway, but knowing that it's not a case of I am this form or I am, as you say, it's multitudes. We are all multitudes. And I guess it's about finding curiosity, isn't it? It's about...
Yes. Again, another quote, it's just come to me. Tove Jansson, the wonderful Tove Jansson, who gave the world the Moomins, said, and I'm paraphrasing because I haven't got the quote in front of me, but you can find it. Never let go of your curiosity. It's all about curiosity, and without it, you will shrivel.
And one of the ones that I use a lot with that is there are no right answers. There is no wrong answer. Being able to use things as your writing prompt so that curiosity makes you discover.
Yeah. Which reminds me, I'm pretty sure it's Somerset Maugham who said, "There are 3 rules for writing a novel successfully. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are."
Definitely one of mine would be aim to be interested, not interesting. That was Creative Writing Toolkit. That was from 2020. I published that. But
that's right.
That's the one that's helped me the most. The second is say the thing. Whatever it is, getting through all of the, oh dear, I'm overthinking it, and into the what am I trying to say, which as a poet is, not going to be news to you. But what would yours be?
Again, I draw inspiration from other people and reflect. I mean, my novel, I may not call myself a historical novelist, but my novels happen to be set in days of yore. So it's like, get over myself. I write historical novels. And of course, research can be absolutely delicious and fascinating and take one away from the page. And it's like, I've had to learn that really nobody apart from me is interested in turnip farming in 14th century Britain.
Yet.
And leave it at, no one cares. And the wonderful Tom Clancy said, "Tell the damn story."
Yeah.
And that for me is that I hold that like as a mantra. It's when I think, oh gosh, here's a tangent about 14th century saints' relics. Yes, I am working on a medieval novel at the moment. No one gives a damn. Just tell the damn story.
There's about 3 questions I wanted to ask you based on that, and I'm now going to challenge myself to remember some of them, but probably not all of them. Among them is research as bribery, that I have a client that I speak to who would go down the research rabbit hole, but not necessarily find it very easy to come back at all, let alone doing justice to the research, that bit. So I've said to her, maybe it's a bribe. Maybe it's something you do for fun and you sort of come back to it. And that's that's her gym exercise, is doing the writing that the research will go into.
Yeah. What I've learned to do, and I still fail because I fail all the time, is that, again, somebody said just fail better. what I try to do, because it really helps, is if I get up to a point where I really need to know what kind of hats people wore in Norwich in 1520, and I don't know, I will do a bracket and then write check, close the bracket and keep going. And I'd say 80 to 90% of the time, I don't actually need it.
That's such a good exercise.
I just, it's like, because it's that thing about if I leave the room, whether that's the room of the page or physically leave the room to go and find a book, I stop writing, I interrupt the flow, and time is so precious and my imagination gets tired. I have to do the thing. I have to do the writing, because you can always fix it in post-production.
Post-production, absolutely. Are you, when you say that you walk off and maybe the inspiration does too, is there a sort of, have you done what I've done where it's these times are the most creatively accessible, so I'm going to move things around it, or how does that work for you?
Well, it's like in terms of my rituals and routines, these days, because again, I change, I develop, I don't just have one process. I'm very open to my processes changing for every single novel I write, and I do each one a bit differently. Something I have found works for me are well-known morning pages. When that's like 3 pages of free writing, I will often come to the page with an idea, because I often will write down notes last thing at night just before I fall asleep, because that's another time when my brain is letting go of the overthinking, and I'll come back to those notes in the morning and just start again. And the more, I think back in the day, I used to think, I'll wait for an idea, then I'll start. What I do now, if I've learned anything, and I have to return to learning over and over, is start writing. And by some kind of alchemy, I might start writing and think, this is absolute rubbish. This is terrible. But I just keep going. And as the more I write, the more I get into the flow, you might say. And ideas seem to kind of come out of nowhere. And of course, it's not nowhere. It's called the imagination. And so I keep going, but not forever. I keep going up to a certain point, then I stop, and then I go and make a cup of tea.
And is that cup of tea where the creative day has gone, this is what I'm giving you, or do you come back?
I'll come back.
You will come back.
I'll go for, because there comes that point, again, I'm far better at noticing it. It's like dowsing when the little rod starts to twizzy. I'm much better at noticing these days when I've reached the point where the flow has stopped and I'm starting to push against something. And then I thought, that's mine. Stand up, walk around.
Yeah.
Go for a walk.
The image I have with that is it's almost like people talk about a screen coming down. For me, it's like I'm not in the words anymore. When I'm in there, I'm really in there, and then it feels like there's a point where something has locked me, has gauzed me out somehow.
Yes, yeah, that's great. I love that, and it's recognizing that when that happens, if I keep going, I'm just gonna be.
You're lying when you keep going. That's what a singing teacher said to me once. She said, "You're not singing, you're lying, you're pretending." And that's what it is for me at that point. If you're too tired or your brain has gone, I'm just not in this column right now.
No, and what I will do is, as I say, go and make a hypothetical cup of tea, or literally go for a walk. That's something I find is integral to my writing life, going for walks.
As much as I hate all of the advertisement breaks in actual television, the way that a walk allows you to go there, and the wonderful stereophonics title, you've got to go there to come back, it does reacquaint you with yourself or something.
It does. And I think it also, very wise people say go for a flaming walk.
Yeah.
Kierkegaard did. Again, he said, it's like when things are stuck, go for a walk. Not my favourite of saints, it has to be said, and I do like a saint, particularly a Virgin Martyr, but St. Augustine, not very good about women, but he did say solvitur ambulando, which basically means it is solved by walking. And I will often find that when I go for a walk, things untangle. The bit that I was maybe stuck with, or that kind of screen that I bumped up against, kind of melts away. And I'll go, God, yes, they can say, yes, she can go there. Yeah, that bit where it can happen. Yeah.
Suddenly it's obvious.
Suddenly it's obvious. And so with my trusty voice notes on my phone, I will go, blah, 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 blah.
Just from a process question, with the voice notes, do you put it into Otter, or do you sit there and sort of type it back to yourself? Or what is your...
I listen to them and I take out what's useful and then I write it out.
I'm hearing, and correct me because it's all assumption and I have no right to it, but I'm hearing a lot of self-knowledge. I feel like you know what works for you.
I know what works for me today. It might change tomorrow, and I stay really flexible about that because, again, it's about maintaining pliability of the grey cells, and I feel that rigidity is not desperately helpful.
I think maybe what I'm seeing is, for some people, permission is a problem. Giving oneself permission takes a lot of effort and feels unnatural. But did you ever struggle with that, or was it a case of...
Good God, yes. Like a lot of folk out there, I had various knockbacks and people kind of being of the opinion, you know, why can't you write nice stories? Women shouldn't write about that, you know, ... etc., etc. You know, my mum used to say, can't you write nice stories? I mean, I never really got her definition of nice, but it was clearly not what I was doing. Certainly when I was in my teens, I wrote a lot of edgy horror. I was reading a lot of horror and fantasy, and that's kind of what I wrote. It was what I was doing at the time. It isn't necessarily what I do now, but, you know, that was then, this is now. Also, something I feel is like really foundational to my ability to grow and develop is I've done a lot of work on what I call my internal critic. I have people who claim they don't have one, and I'm fascinated by this. And when I say internal critic, what I mean is this mean, picky, haranguing, critical voice that says things like, you're a fraud, who told you you could write? When people say they like your writing, they're only being nice. Well, that's rubbish, isn't it? You can't put a sentence together, etc., etc. And, you know, that classic one, you shouldn't be writing stories like this. Because it was in my head, unsurprisingly, I thought this was truth. I thought that this was me telling myself the truth about my writing. And then, because of the work I was doing on, I suddenly thought, hang on a minute, I remember when this voice first arrived, and I actually found the crime scene. I actually worked out the moment that voice first happened for me. And, you know, it's like in those detective dramas, when they go to the crime scene, they get out their swabs and they pick up little bits of evidence and DNA, and then they can work out. And once you've worked out who committed the crime, you're kind of on the way to, you know, solving things. And I felt like I had really solved something. I worked out where it came from. And I realised that meant that I wasn't born with it. It hadn't always lived in my head. It may have arrived early. For me, it arrived when I was about 9 or 10. But it wasn't always there, which meant it wasn't me. It was an external voice. And if it's an external voice, it's somebody else's opinion. And I found that immensely liberating.
So there was a moment.
The voice hasn't gone away, but I call her Mavis.
Huh.
And people that know me know it's like, I go, oh God, Mavis is loud this morning. Yeah. And it means that, like, when I'm starting to write, it's like, you can't make it yet. And it's just like, yeah, okay, talk to the hand, Mavis, I'm busy. And being able to externalize that internal critic into this yappy creature who never says anything nice. Of course she doesn't say anything nice. And I call her Mavis. It's been incredibly freeing.
And you don't need to answer this if you don't want to, or in any detail that you don't want to, but was it another person saying something, or was it a different kind of moment?
No, it was my best friend at school, at primary school. I don't, it's like just because it's like we haven't got all day. But my best friend, I say best friend in apostrophes, said something really, really mean about a picture I'd drawn of a lollipop lady, because they were ladies then. And she said something really, really mean because I'd just won a prize with it. And I believed her because she was my best friend, and best friends always tell the truth, don't they? I was very naive and trusting, and she was mean.
She was mean.
Incredibly. And jealous and everything else. And I was 9 and I didn't understand people were like that.
And it also transposed itself, if you will, because it was about a picture. But it became about writing, potentially because you loved writing and because it's all self-expression.
And so, the idea is that, because she said about my picture that had won a prize, they felt sorry for you because they really wanted to give it to me.
And of course, our brains don't go, here are the many glaring errors in that in that logic.
My 9-year-old brain said me to.
Do you want to know a game we play for that?
Please.
There is a game I have where I get people at the Writers' Gym to draw a bunch of lines down like so. For those of you listening in black and white, I am doing claws down the screen.
Vertical lines.
Yeah, vertical and then horizontal.
Oh, so you're making a grid.
It's a massive noughts and crosses board. They just have to be big enough to write a sentence in. And into there, we throw all of the phrases that come up from what for you is Mavis. For me is my dear friend Liz calls them the brain weasels. She says shoot the brain weasels.
Yeah.
I say the should fairies because should seems to come up a lot. But that would be things along the lines of, this isn't the kind of story you can tell. You're supposed to do this kind of story. It's going to be rubbish anyway. My favourite irony about this is usually to be, it's too weird in one and then it's too boring in the next one. Anyway, so I go through and I fill the grid and then I say to myself, as I look through all of them, positive opposite. So for example, what if it's too weird? What if this is the book that saves somebody's life? Because the thing about too weird is we need it when we need something where we are feeling isolated or we are feeling misunderstood. So anyway, we go through them, or, my dad would hate this, for example. Somebody will put, well, what if somebody else loves it, needs it? Or, if I go, oh, I'll never be as good as Rosie, I'll put underneath, what if Rosie one day loves my book as much as I love Rosie's book? And, you go through them all and you do that and you realise we all have our should fairies flying around. And what I then get people to do is I get them to write little time signatures when they hear those thoughts. That's why it's called Excuses Bingo, because if you can tick them all off within a day, you get to shout bingo. As long as you're still writing.
Excuses Bingo.
Excuses Bingo.
That.
Yeah, it's in a book proposal going out into the world last Friday, actually. So who knows? It may
a really
be...
good one. It's great.
Thank you. I found it enormously helpful. And it just, when it's like bird spotting, when you see a blackbird at 10:12 a.m. and then you see it at 10:12 a.m. the next day, you're just going to go, oh, blackbird. And just being able to go, oh, it's that thing where I think I'm not as good as my friend. Oh, it's this thing where I think blah, 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 blah. It stops having that power of, as you described it, it felt like logic. It felt like pure sense when you're alone listening to it. But when you externalize it onto that piece of paper, you get to see the patterns.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is, because it's like a script.
And it is a script. It's just that you didn't notice yourself writing it, and creativity and anxiety are the same software for the script.
No, absolutely. No, that's great, Rachel. Well, good luck with the book proposal.
Thank you. I like sharing Excuses Bingo. I think it does need to be in the world as much as possible.
If I ever suggest it, I will credit you.
Yes, please. Yes, Rachel and the Writers' Gym, because everybody's playing with it. I'm sure it's out there in lots of places I don't know, but I do enjoy being credited, so thank you.
I always do, yeah.
In terms of, I mentioned permission. Is there anything else you found along the way you needed to sort of give yourself in order to make this work, make this, that strange word, easier, meaning we found what works for us?
Kind of giving myself some gentleness. What I strive to do is show myself the gentleness that I show to other writers. I mean, one thing I absolutely love and which feeds and nourishes me is being a mentor for other writers, which is different to being an editor, although I do that as well. But I come to mentoring with an attitude of acceptance and warm encouragement and cheerleading, and something I try to do for myself. And it is sometimes a struggle because of that classic one of like the person who's hardest in the world is you on yourself. But to kind of give myself a break. Harshness never helped anybody in any way at all. And so I really strive to be less harsh with myself.
And it's about spotting when you're doing it as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the way that you've described mentoring does sound a lot like the way that I describe coaching, because as you know, because we mentioned, I came from a teaching background, and when I started the coaching qualification, and suddenly the language for the best kind of teaching or directing in theatre that I'd experienced suddenly made perfect sense, that we're bringing it out of somebody. We're not pushing it onto them. We are encouraging it forth.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 In if you fancy doing a swap in exchange for Excuses Bingo, are there any sort of tools or exercises or even habits that you'd encourage?
Here's one I absolutely love, and because you can do it either when you've just on a train and you've got your phone with you and some Wi-Fi access, or you can do it because I really hope every writer out there has a bookshelf full of physical, solid books, because not everything is available on the internet. And to basically go pick up 3 random books, 4 if you're feeling particularly adventurous. They could be recipe books, How to Fix Your Chainsaw, or the novels of Jane Austen, and take the 3 books, open them up at a random page, pick a random line, close your eyes, stick a finger in, and basically with all 3 books, pick out about between 3 and 5 random phrases, write them down, and then use them as springboards for writing anything, and try to get all 5 in.
Oh, that's beautiful. You pick a lane. You've got the prompt. Okay, I may or may not be inspired by this prompt, but in I go. And then if I'm not inspired by this prompt, and if I stick with it and I keep writing, as with Morning Pages, my brain will find the next side road to where it actually wants to go. And that sounds like another example of that.
Yeah, exactly, because it's that thing about surprising oneself and just literally picking up 3 books at random, and they don't all have to be fiction, they don't all have to be poetry, they can literally be instruction manuals or whatever. The latest letter from one's accountant, and just picking out phrases that jump out at you or just picking them out at random. I am a big randomness enthusiast.
That's so lovely, and it's a great way of explaining. I've only had a couple of people ever say this. I don't know if you've had this, but somebody will say, well, that prompt wasn't as good as the other prompt. And you just want to help them make friends with their own brain and know that you can move from one thought to another. It's just getting into the zone.
Yeah. And it's like, again, that thing about giving yourself permission to, throw it all away when you've done it. It was literally it was exercising the writing muscles. Again, one of the reasons I do writing in the morning, apart from the fact I'm a morning person, and I know not everyone else is it is like going to the gym. Writer's gym.
Not a coincidence.
I see what I did there. Who would have thought? I don't think there is anything mystical or magical about writing. I don't think writers are separate human beings who live in their ivory towers away from mere humble mortals. I think that's a part, personally. I think that writing is no more mysterious than learning to be a plumber, and quite possibly of less use. But it's like what do plumbers do? They go to plumber school. They practice plumbing. They do it wrong. They watch good plumbers and learn how to plumb the right way. They learn how to fix leaks. They do it again and again and again and again and again and again. And funnily enough, they get better. So writers, it's like we read books, because as Stephen King said, if you're a writer and say you haven't got enough time to read, go away, basically. We read, we go and listen to other writers, we talk to other writers like this. We practice our writing day in and day out, or weekend in and weekend out if you can't find time during the week. But we just do it. And then we get better. We exercise our muscles in the gym and we learn to be better plumbers, writers, whatever.
It's about repeatedly showing up for it and realising that the small changes are the big changes. Sadly, they're also the ones you're less likely to spot as they happen.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about like exercising the muscles is that it means if you're planning to do like the London Marathon, you don't suddenly go, it's Sunday, I'm going to do the London Marathon next week. You practice for a considerable amount of time before you embark on it. Otherwise, you're going to fall over after 200 yards, gasping.
I've remembered what one of the other questions I knew I'd get distracted from was, and I'm going to leap back to it, and I realise time's getting on a bit, but this is too much fun not to. The mention of historical fiction, and you said my books are set in historical time periods, but you're not quite feeling comfortable in the hat, possibly, or is it?
So, I mean, it's like, it's not that I'm a genre snob, good heavens, anything but I feel that my novels are a little bit slippery in terms of genre. I mean, because you could also call them magic realism. They could also fit under the, uncanny and spooky, hat. They have queerness in them, strangely enough. But, if people want to call them historical novels, if people want to call me a historical novelist, I've been called worse.
And you've historically been working your way backwards most recently, because we're now in the Fate.
Yes, I've written novels set in the UK in the 19th century, early 20th century. I've also got a particular passion for 13 fees, and that's what I'm working on at the moment. But yes, I most recently delved back into the ancient past, or the mythological past, really, in the Fates, which is obviously set in ancient Greece. And I enjoyed myself thoroughly.
And this is with any book that anybody enjoys, of course, there's different things you get out of it. There's different reasons. But I think for me, it comes back to how we started this conversation, that for me, the characters are finding that there are different sides of themselves. And that's not one thing. That can be queer identity. That can be aesthetic, as we talked about. That can be geographical, or class, or what the expectations of what the society around you is calling normal are. But it's always been identity for me.
Well, yeah, I guess I like to create people who develop and grow within the course of a novel, because I think anything else is a bit boring, really. I mean, I wouldn't want my character to start at A on page 1 and then be exactly the same place on page 300. That would be a bit boring. So I like them to have like struggles and obstacles and things they go through, and that they pick up and learn from them and mess up.
Yes, and through messing up, we learn more about ourselves than through sitting at home tidily.
I hope so.
Yes, and it's as true for writing practices. I mean, yes, I get that all fiction is character needs to change. Character either changes and moves on, or if we're in tragedy, doesn't. But it's just really wonderful to be in all of these different worlds and have people essentially fighting the same battle. I think that it is about either society, or sometimes as writers ourselves might want us to play safe and stay in a certain role. But actually the journey, to me anyway, does seem to be about becoming oneself.
That's lovely. Yes, becoming oneself, becoming one's authentic self. Yeah, and in terms of tragedy, I think I think people change a lot in tragedy.
Yeah, no, I just meant that tragic hero does not learn fatal flaw, dies.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, because I'm thinking about all the changes that King Lear goes through, and it's the changes, and his, it's the changes that he makes. That mean it becomes a tragedy. If he'd kind of
But
just
did he
realised...
learn what he'd done wrong? Because I don't think he did.
No, he didn't learn.
He didn't learn how he could have saved Cordelia by not sodding it up for her in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of tragedy as well as of pretty much everything else, actually.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It has been such a pleasure talking about all this, Rosie. If I were to ask you if there was anything else you just wanted to chuck out into our world of Writer's Gym about creative confidence, writing lives, and what I talk about as beating the inspiration addiction, showing up anyway, and then it comes to you, what else has been on your mind?
Keep going. Keep going. It's worth it. Even at the times when it feels that there is absolutely no point, keep going. You know, if you've got an idea for something and you think nobody's going to like it, you may not be a bestseller, but somebody out there will love it. Somebody out there will hear what you're saying and it will resonate with them. And it will mean something to them. You will find your fam, even if you don't think so. Please keep going. I mean, you know, just as an example, I was watching a documentary about Johnny Cash the other night, and it's like in his youth, he was this enormous star. You know, he sold millions of records for Columbia Records, who during the 70s and 80s dropped him because he wasn't earning them enough money. So somebody who'd been one of the biggest stars in the world went to nothing. And it's like he had the most terrible time during the 70s and 80s. When, you know, it was like my creative life is over. Rick Rubin rediscovered him and brought him back to the world. And so he created this most amazing couple of albums towards the end of his life. And, Rick Rubin is essentially responsible for bringing him to a completely new generation of people who just adored his work. And I mean, I know that's an extreme example, but dear Lord, the 70s and 80s must have been unbearable for him. 2 decades of hell. And it's that thing about keep going.
Yeah. And knowing that most of the people whose lives, minds we touch and affect and who grow by us, we're never going to hear from them anyway.
We're never going to hear from them, but be assured someone will have read your words and you may never meet them, but they are out there.
Rosie Garland, thank you so much for joining the Writers' Gym.
My pleasure. It really has been a pleasure. I love the community of writers. I love talking about writing with other writers. Thank you for inviting me.
You've visited the Writers' Gym with author and coach Dr Rachel Knightley. Production and sound design are by Ashley Lexine, and theme music is by Chris Gregory. To join a Writers' Gym workout online or in London, as a guest or as a member, visit writersgym.com or email thewritersgym@rachelknightley.com.